Okay, are we ready, folks? I think that,
Sit down, Melissa, so we can
we're
start.
ready.
But I'll have to get ready.
Okay? All right. 7 o'clock, we're going to call to order the regular meeting of the Common Council of the City of Platteville, Tuesday, January 14th, 2014. And we'll start with roll call.
Barbara Doss. Here. Barbara Stockhausen. Here. Dick Bonin.
Here?
Ken Killian.
Here.
Eileen Nichols.
Here.
Patrice Steiner. Here. And Mike Den.
Here.
First item this evening is a public hearing regarding ordinance 1401, rezone of 600 East Side Road, and we'll start with staff presentation.
Okay, that property consists of 39 acres that the city recently purchased as an expansion of the city's industry park. The property is currently zoned R3 multifamily residential, so that's not appropriate zoning for industry park. Staff is proposing to change that to M4 Applied Technology District. That's the same zoning as the city's current industrial park. I know last time there was questions about why isn't it M2. Personally, I think that would also be a potential zoning district that's also industrial. The intent obviously is to get rid of the multifamily because that is not appropriate for an industry park. But as I mentioned, we're just proposing M4 because that would be consistent with the city's current industrial park. Comprehensive plan showed us that area as industrial or mixed use, so either one of those districts would be appropriate for that area and the use as industrial. So as I mentioned, our recommendation is M4, but I think there's some decisions to be made at the council if they prefer M2, but that would be our recommendation, is do M4 to be consistent with the rest of the industry park. Any questions?
Joe, I have one. I went out and looked around to see what we had available in all the industrial park, the old one, without the addition of the Rosemeyer one. And we got 26.97 acres out there, but every bit of that is zoned M4, okay? So therefore, if we want to go M4 with all the Rosemeyers, then we have no diversification in that whole industrial park. If we had somebody that wanted to come in and heavy industry, like an M2 or an M1, we couldn't, we'd have to change zoning or have them go through the problem of getting a variance or dividing all this stuff up. Why not divide some of this land up into some of those other zoning areas, especially since it's an industrial park, instead of having the whole complete park M4?
Well, as I mentioned, I think M2 was discussed last time, and I have no issue with that. I think that would also be an appropriate zoning district. So I guess that's whatever the council would like to do. It's your property at this point, so
Thank you.
it's your decision.
Any other questions from the council?
So we could zone half and half, M2 and M4.
Is that your question? Could that be done?
Yeah, why not?
Can that be changed at a later date?
Yes.
Well,
I mean, like I said, it's your property, so you can always make a decision to change it. You just have to go through the process.
It's our property, so if we zoned it M4 now and we wanted to zone it M2, we could.
Correct.
It's because it's our property. You know, an arbitrary decision to divide half of it as M4 and half of it as M2 may lead to the same situation that Mike was just talking about, in terms of a person may come in, a company may come in and they may want a certain parcel because it fits their industry better, and it still could be M4. You know, I don't see any point in doing half and half. It just, I think, adds a complication. So I'd be interested in hearing if anybody's going to speak on this.
Well then, if somebody comes in and wants to go into, do something M1, M2, what does the city do? Tell them we don't have M1, M2? We're gonna tell them that we can change it from M4 to M1, M2?
Yeah.
what would the process be, Joe, for changing it if a company came in and wanted M1? or M2?
Same process this evening. You hold a public hearing and consider a rezoning.
So it could be done.
why do we have to have 1, 2, 3, or 3 and 4? Because it looks to me like reading through there that a lot of the same descriptions in each class.
I didn't write the original zoning, so I guess I can't answer that, but I think they're trying to tailor certain uses in certain areas. There is quite a bit of overlap.
If I could jump in here for a minute, the M4 zoning code is not as heavy, it's not for heavy industrial as much as M1 or M2. So if we looked at M4, that would give us more, we would have to go through a public hearing to make it M1 or M2. So there would be greater public discussion for a large industry or a heavy industry moving into our industrial park. So for example, if an asphalt plant wanted to build there, we would have a public hearing to have to rezone it. It might allow for greater public input for a heavier use. Whereas if you had an M1 or an M2, it would already be an accepted use and you wouldn't get that input necessarily.
But it would be much easier for the business or company that wanted to come in, and we've talked about this before, we try to make it very accessible for these businesses because a lot of them don't want a lot of public information given out until they actually decide to come in. I believe I was told that. The other thing is, prime example, Dick, crematorium, M2, can't be anywhere else without special permits, okay? Has to be in an M2. Although we have one that's different.
Okay, any other council discussion? Otherwise, the next item would be public statements in favor. Anyone here to speak in favor of the rezoning to the M4? Public statements against? Public statements in general? Any further council discussion?
No, not really. I'd be happy to go along with Joe's recommendation.
I would just like to see some more diversification in that industrial park area. So we have the option of at least a few places where people could come right in and wouldn't have to go through all this.
Well, do you have a recommendation, Mike, as to the number of acres? Is that what you're looking at? Number of acres?
It wouldn't necessarily be, well, I suppose it would have to be acres that, in rezoning. No, I did not come up with that. I just thought that the whole industrial park would not necessarily have to be zoned M4. I thought we could have a little bit of it. I just know that right now we have 26.97 acres M4 already before we add the Rosemary Rosemeyer properties.
All right, seeing no other discussion, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. We'll vote.
Doss,
Yes.
Stackhausen,
Yes.
Bonin,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
Yes.
motion carries.
Common council action.
Motion to adopt ordinance number 1401 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss,
Yes.
Stackhausen,
Yes.
Bonin,
Yes.
Killian,
No.
Nichols,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
No.
motion carries.
Before we go on to the consideration of the consent calendar, our city manager has someone he'd like to introduce.
Jan, would you be able to work the camera for a minute?
Sure.
This evening, I'd like to introduce the City Council to our new communications specialist. This is Jody Richards. Jody comes to us from Boyd Gaming, where she was employed as a graphic designer, and before that, she worked 12 years at Land's End. Jody has a University of Wisconsin Platteville degree. It's in communication technologies management, and she has an emphasis with graphic design and image design. So welcome to the team, Jody.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for this very unique opportunity. I've enjoyed living in Platteville for the past 15 years, and I look forward to learning my role in communicating news, information, and the benefits of living in the city to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. We'll move on to the consideration of the consent calendar, as soon as we let Jan get back to her spot.
Thanks, Jan.
Yes, I would like to have licenses removed for separate action, please.
All right, if you would make a motion to that. In fact, let me read them off first. The following items may be approved on a single motion and vote due to their routine nature or previous discussion. Please indicate to the council president if you prefer separate discussion and action. A is minutes of the December 10th, 2013 regular council meeting. B is payment of bills. C, financial report for December 2013. D, appointments to boards and commissions, and tonight I am appointing Cindy Shave to the Roundtree Gallery. E is licenses. We have a temporary Class B retailers license to sell fermented malt beverages for St. Augustine University Parish on February 8th. In your packet, there's a list of 1 and/or 2-year operators licenses, and 3 is the taxi drivers. So if you would make your motion.
I make a motion to approve the consent calendar except for the licenses.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss,
Yes.
Stackhausen,
Yes.
Bonin,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes,
Nichols,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, and your question or comment on the license?
Now I make a motion to approve licenses, the number 1 temporary Class B retailer self permit for St. Augustine's, 1 and 2 year operator licenses, 1 year operator licenses to Terry Adams, Jesse Alft, Ian Peck, Cody St. Michael, 2-year operator licenses to Jody Chapman, Alicia Graham, Samantha Joint, Martha Knox, Tracy Markow, Jennifer Richardson, and a taxi driver license to Angela Rice.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Do I have it separate?
We had a license committee meeting and decided we wanted to do it that way.
Okay, so this is gonna be a new procedure then?
Could be.
Okay, all right.
not necessarily.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss,
Yes.
Stackhausen,
Yes.
Bonin,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes,
Nichols,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
Yes.
motion carries.
Tonight, citizens' comments, observations, and petitions. I do not have anyone who is registered to speak this evening, so we'll go on to the reports. Committee reports, council or staff representative are listed after. Airport Commission, minutes are in the packet, so I don't have anything to add. Board of Zoning Appeals, extraterritorial, Den.
question.
I'm sorry, on
Did
which
you
one?
say me?
Just a minute, I think Ken had a
I have a
question.
question. What's the status of this project along 8081? I see the appeal was denied. Does it affect that or just?
Are you asking us or
Simply
Den?
replacement?
Are you asking Joe?
Joe or Mike? Mike was not listed as being here.
For some reason, they have me listed in zoning, but extraterritorial, and I'm not on the extraterritorial, I'm on the zoning for the city.
So come
You're right,
back to
that's
Joe.
2 separate ones, okay, Joe.
That project was approved.
But they didn't get the variance as far as distance.
They modified their plan and then reapplied,
Okay,
so it was approved.
thank you.
Library Board, the minutes are in the packet. I have nothing to add. Police and Fire Commission, Den.
Nothing new?
Redevelopment Authority, Dawes.
Nothing new?
Water and Sewer, Killian, Steiner, and Bonin.
Nothing new.
No additions.
Nothing?
Okay, other reports in our packet. The Airport Financial Report for December of 2013. City Attorney Itemized Statement. Water, Sewer, Revenue, and Expenditures for December 2013. The Quarterly Staffing Plan Report. Department Progress Reports. Any questions on any of those or comments?
I have a question about city attorney report. Is the travel amount specified so much per month? How's that set up?
I'm sorry, Ken, I didn't hear your question.
The question is about travel. I'm trying to find the paper. How is that set up? Is that so much money per month? Because I think the number 350 shows up quite a bit.
It's not a number that's set per month. It's based on the number of times primarily that I have to travel to and from Lancaster. So if you looked at a bill for a month, it's possible that if I went in consecutive months 3 or 4 times to Lancaster during a month, that number would reoccur in multiple, over month to month, just as a matter of chance.
So it's a per mile?
Is it,
It's just how long it took me to get there.
are you being paid so much a mile?
No.
It's
Are you being
hours.
paid so much a trip?
It's hours.
If I'm driving to Lancaster, it's 0.7. And I drive back from Lancaster, it's 0.7 of an hour.
So you're paid per mile,
Per hour.
Per hour.
Per hour.
per hour.
That's .7.
Oh, so you're charging per hour for the travel.
Trip to Lancaster and back. For instance, the trip here tonight was no charge. That's what my contract says. I have to come to council meetings, no charge. I have to come to police and fire commission meeting 1 time a month, no charge. Oftentimes, I mean, it depends on how it works out. There's been times where I've come to Platteville for an airport commission meeting, and I don't bill for the mileage. I don't bill for the time I spent driving. So it's
based on time spent,
yeah.
not miles. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, we're gonna go on to the action items. First item is sale of city property, the Platteville Industrial Park for Family Pet Hospital.
Yes, the PADIC board met on November 6th and voted to recommend the sale of 1620 Means Drive to Terry Beebe at the price of $1 per acre for the construction of a new veterinary facility. That is what we're considering today, is the sale of 1620 Means Drive to Terry Beebe or TJT Properties LLC. Included in the packet is the offer to purchase as well as the staff's recommendation. Staff recommends that the offer is accepted except for paragraph, and this is a typo in the report, I believe it's paragraph 4 of addendum A.
Paragraph 3.
It's paragraph 3. For some reason I remembered paragraph 4. Anyhow, the paragraph that we're concerned about deals with special assessments, and so we're asking that the city council approve the offer to purchase except for the addendum, paragraph 3, and what we could do is counter the offer to purchase. And that's the staff recommendation.
Larry, I have a question. As I read this, it looked to me like we're paying half of the closing costs. Is that correct?
We're going to divide the cost of paying for the title company to close the transaction.
We're already giving this land at $1 an acre instead of the base rate of $17,700. Why would we want to pay any more? We're actually going to have a negative then, aren't we?
The decision as the terms is up for you guys to decide whether acceptable or not. The closing fee, half that the city would pay, is relatively trivial.
Okay, and what would that?
About $125.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
So at that rate, we're in the hole considerably.
As Brian noted, it's up to the city council to determine whether or not that's a acceptable offer.
Thank you.
I have a question. I have a question. The addendum was written by the city?
No.
No.
Was the
This is
addendum
part of the
written-
offer that was submitted.
Written by the buyer?
By Chris
Correct.
Conner.
Okay. Well, then who wrote this in dark print? Is that a separate writing?
Are you talking about the addendum?
Addendum A.
All of that was created by buyer.
Okay, all right.
This is buyer's offer.
Right.
And when staff says we recommend the offer be accepted except for paragraph 3 of the addendum, that paragraph 3 includes the material that's in bold. We don't think that city ought to accept that paragraph either, just so we're clear.
So Brian, you're saying item 1, item 2, but then any indention for item 3 is what you're saying not. So it would be number 1, lines 8 and 9, purchase price, number 2, closing agent, and then start again with the terms and conditions of this addendum A?
Right, everything in between those 2 points would be
struck.
Would be struck.
And if we agree to this, you could negotiate as far as stormwater management.
I think that we would, if you said reject this offer and counter by declining to accept paragraph 3 of the addendum, we would be negotiating, and then in the negotiating position would be that we're not going to make any promises with respect to assessing this property for stormwater management purposes or any other limitation on the city's ability to assess.
And has that been our practice in the industrial park?
I'm not aware of any promises that have been made to anyone else in the industry park regarding assessments.
So we would be in essence, if we make the counteroffer, we would in essence be following the procedure we've been following in the industrial park. If the
Yes,
counteroffer said we
I
do
think it
not
would be
accept it.
consistent with with the terms of other sale of property in that park.
At this point, do we have the liberty to add something else for us to go away with by adding the paragraph 2 of the addendum we didn't want?
If number 2 was objectionable, this would be an appropriate time to indicate that.
Okay, because that includes the shared closing costs.
Of $120.
So going back to staff recommendation, staff recommends the offer is acceptable except for paragraph 3 of addendum A. Staff does not think the city should condition or limit its ability to special assess for stormwater management facilities the city may construct. Staff recommends the council direct staff to counter the offer to purchase and remove the special assessment restriction. So that is what is being asked for us to consider, and we would need a motion to either accept that or change whatever we want to change, I guess.
I move that we accept the offer and that we reject paragraph 3, addendum A, and that this paragraph 3 be rewritten by the city. And that is my motion.
Second.
Clarification, when you say rewritten, does rewritten include the notion that it would be simply deleted?
No. Personally, I believe that it should be in there. There should be discussion about stormwater management. I find that the paragraph that is the most objectionable is the one in dark print. That needs to be modified the most.
And that is part of paragraph 3, so that's what
part of
you
paragraph 3, section 3.
And in what, and does your modification then direct the staff to remove the special assessment restriction?
No.
When you say rewrite, then what do you mean by rewrite, Ken?
Make it acceptable as far as, I don't think we should take out the special assessment. If I were rewriting this, I would remove the first sentence of that dark print And then I would modify the rest of it. You could say, for example, seller warrants and represents, and continue on. And then going down to the second line from the bottom of that dark paragraph, nor will seller require construction of a wastewater management or assessment for a facility any larger than is required by the DNR for the property. You could do something like that.
I withdraw my second. I don't believe it's the council's business to try to write a legal document at a meeting.
I'm not telling how to do it. I'm just giving my thoughts on it.
I'm not sure what the motion is then.
All right, so
The
we,
motion is to take out paragraph 3, section 3, and have the staff rewrite. We'll see what they come up with.
I think I understand what staff's recommendation is, and the way that staff would rewrite it is to simply remove it in its entirety.
The whole section?
The recommendation of staff is to delete paragraph 3 entirely. I don't think the staff believes that the city shouldn't be making representations about what it will or will not do with respect to stormwater maintenance, because that plan's still being developed. And staff doesn't think that the city should limit or condition its ability to assess for stormwater management purpose improvements that the city might construct. And Larry, if I'm speaking out of turn.
No, you're doing great. He's explaining it very well. That's the way we had the discussion at a staff level was that it's very rare for a city to give up its ability to do special assessments for anything. And our position was that in this case, we probably should not include that in the offer if we are drafting a counter proposal.
Well, I agree with that.
Based on the size of that property, they don't even fall under where they would need to have a storm water retention area there, do they? Based on that 1 acre, the acreage?
If they disturb more than 1 acre of land, the DNR does require a detention pond. My understanding at this time is that that is not likely to happen. I anticipate that the development will be 1 acre or less.
Correct.
At least that's my understanding.
so the recommendation again of the staff is to delete paragraph 3 because the city does not want to remove the city's right to special assess. It may be that the property owner, the person who wants to buy this property, may never be assessed. But the point is, we don't want to give up that right as a city. Is that correct?
Well stated.
Yes.
So, we need a motion. We had a motion, but the second has been withdrawn, Ken, so
I'll make a motion that we accept this purchase, this agreement, with the exception of the paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 of the addendum.
is there a second?
My paragraph, or paragraph 2.
You're taking out the closing?
Yeah, because why should we pay for half the closing cost?
Well, he'll be paying 11,000 in property taxes eventually.
It's in a TIF, it'll stay in
Like
the
you said,
TIF.
it's
All right.
minor.
We don't have a second, so that motion failed for lack of a second.
I make a motion, we accept the staff recommendation and delete paragraph 3 in its entirety from addendum A.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss?
Yes.
Stackhausen?
Yes.
Bonin?
Yes.
Killian?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Steiner?
Yes.
Den?
No.
Motion carries.
Next item, the development agreement amendment for TID 5.
Yes. Oh, do you want to do that? Okay. Several months ago, the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the Joint Review Board revised a portion of TID District Number 5. And in that revision, it had been planned that the City of Platteville would refinance the debt associated with TID District 5 and conclude the relationship the city has with the developer of the Keystone subdivision. Attached is the agreement. What you have before you is the agreement that would conclude that relationship and essentially say that the facts or the obligations laid out in the original agreement have been met. This document also calls for the city to do a refinancing, which will be later on the agenda if this goes forward. At this time, we anticipate that there's probably there probably aren't any outstanding, or there are not any real outstanding obligations left on behalf of the developer. The biggest outstanding obligation is the payments that is coming from the developer to the city for 25% of the infrastructure costs. And you'll see in this agreement under number 6, where the developer is guaranteeing that payment through a first mortgage on lot number 2 and 3 of the development, so that the city maintains the security to ensure that that payment is made in the future. Does anyone have any questions about the agreement?
I have one, Larry, just about this. Now, were you talking about that $245,000 bill that's still sitting out there for the infrastructure that the city paid for to put in? Is this the infrastructure you're talking about, the developer said it would pay back?
I'm not aware of what the total amount is. When the project was, the original agreement was written, it said that the city would cover the development, the infrastructure costs, but the developer would pay the city back for 25% of those costs.
Okay,
So,
I had a long time ago, I asked Dwayne to look that up for me.
oh, I'm sorry, Dwayne, do
And
you
we
happen to know
found,
that?
and we, remember we found, went in and looked on that TIF, and it was $245,000 for water and sewer type infrastructure. Because remember we talked to each other about that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot like this, but, and I apologize, but we talked about, and you didn't think it was there, but you went in and looked and saw that the city had invested $245,000 in the infrastructure, and I asked how that would come back, and you basically told me it would be paid back through the TIF. As far as, you know, as the TIF money went back into the TIF increment, it would be paid, once that was paid off, it would follow through on that. I was just curious.
That was the water and sewer cost for the extension of the, Howard, you could probably explain it better, the east.
The interceptor line that runs out the railroad bed.
And that would be paid back to the city after all the payment would be made to the developer. That was the intention.
So that would go to the developer, correct? Or not, would not?
It'd go to the city.
It goes
the
to
water
the
and sewer department,
city.
actually.
And so that was part of what the city had to absorb then on that TIF, is that correct? Without any payback?
Well, the intention is it would be paid back once the developer has paid back.
Okay.
It's a separate loan, separate from the developer loan.
Right.
Okay, so that's not what you're talking about now?
No, and I'm sorry, I wasn't a part of that conversation, so I didn't have any idea what you were referring to.
Sorry, I didn't explain that.
And actually, just for clarification, the money was for water and sewer, so actually that money will be paid back to the water and sewer utility, not the city, is that correct?
That is correct.
Correct.
That's a debt from the TID to the water and sewer utility.
Correct.
Yeah, just so that wasn't this one, okay.
Any other questions or discussion on this proposal?
Now, wait, is this the first proposal that you brought? In our discussion at the last council meeting, we discussed maybe a rewrite on that developer's agreement based on maybe letting the TIF pay itself off. So, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but they kind of run hand in hand, and if this gets voted in, then it's probably a possibility that the other one will too. Can I jump to this and ask you, what would the benefits be of paying this TIF off, borrowing the money to pay the TIF off instead of letting the TIF pay itself off?
What are the benefits of approving this agreement and transferring the existing TID debt out of the developer's name and into the city's name?
That part I understand.
Is that the question?
No, that wasn't the question, and I probably should have saved it for our next one. But if we agree to this, then we're also basically agreeing to get ready to pay this TIF off. Is that correct? Because the way it's written for the developer, we're going to pay him off.
Well, right. What happens if you approve this agreement, then you're under an obligation to pay the developers balance of what is owed on the TIF.
Correct.
So it's a debt that the developer is paying to the bank on behalf of this TIF district.
Right.
That's coming from the increment in the TID. So if you do approve this, then we have to come up with the funds to cover that debt.
Okay. Can we use the funds that the TIF is generating now in the way we're to pay it off instead of a one lump sum? That's the point I'm trying to get at.
Well,
We can continue to pay it off, correct? With the TIF right now, it's got 4 years to go at 2.75% interest, will pay itself in full. Okay?
Right.
Does that doesn't alter, this agreement wouldn't alter the way we pay that off?
It doesn't in itself, but it could. This agreement simply says that debt is no longer the responsibility of the developer, but rather is now the responsibility of the TIF district.
Okay.
And later on, we'll borrow money to pay off, on behalf of the TIF, to pay off that developer. And when we do that, there is the option of allowing the current TID revenue, the current increment that's coming in, to continue to pay that debt, where it will not impact the taxpayers of the community, per se. Or you can drag those payments out over another 10 years and use the money to make improvements to that TID district or to do other things with those funds. So under the financing mechanism, which is later on the agenda, you'll have additional flexibilities as to how to handle the situation.
Thank you, that's what I was looking for.
Okay.
I do have a question. Unfortunately, I have this memory. I don't know how many years ago this was, 5 or 6 or 7, when the state, we became part of this issue with the state and prevailing wage and.
DWD.
Yep.
The DWD?
We've had a lot of conversations about that.
Department of Workforce Development, for those of us who may have tried to forget that.
Yeah, well, is that resolved, and to what extent do we need to continue to worry about that in relation to the action that we could possibly be taking?
Well, it's been outstanding for 7 years. At this point,
All right, so
we're unsure as to what will happen.
Okay, so the issue at that point was, when the infrastructure was put in, it was put in as a private infrastructure.
Yes.
And we thought we were,
Yep.
that's the way it was put in, and that was fine, and all of a sudden, several years later, 7? Or, I don't know how long,
Couple.
the state came back and said, oh, well, we don't actually believe that a private individual did that. We believe that that the city in fact did that, and should have paid prevailing wage to the people who did the infrastructure.
And if
And
I
then
may,
there's
and
this-
if I may just interrupt and just add that we were not the only city that was
Yeah, we're part of
chosen
7
for this
or 9
particular,
or 11
yeah,
or
there were
something.
13 total. We were one of 13, so it wasn't just Platteville. Somebody else had some other ideas.
I think the bottom line in that case is, either way, if that lawsuit ever gains traction, the funds to pay whatever happens with that, any liability that would exist would be a TIF expense, with or without this agreement. I think that's what you're looking for. Is that what your question was?
Right. My
Okay.
question is if.
Who's responsible for it?
If in fact 15 years down the road, they finally decide that we're gonna be responsible for it, what does that mean? Who's going to pay? And what you're telling me, Brian, is that in this case, that it would become a TIF expense.
It'd be a TID eligible expense, just if you think about it, the claim is that the contractor hired by the developer should have paid a prevailing wage and didn't. So if the developer had obtained a prevailing wage determination and that prevailing wage was higher than what was actually paid, then he would have paid that wage, and then it would have become a TIF eligible expense. So you spin it around one way or the other, it comes back to the same point, right?
Yep.
So in conclusion, this agreement should not impact
Okay,
that issue.
that's fine. you know, and I had no clue. I've kind of lost track of where that'll, hopefully, that's all been forgotten somewhere, but I've finally learned that, you know, there seem to be rocks that people find later on and turn over, and out it comes again. Okay, that's all I want to know.
All right, any other questions or discussion on the development agreement amendment for TID 5? Now, we can move on with some kind of a motion.
I'll move that we approve the TID 5 Development Agreement Amendment
As proposed.
as proposed.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss,
Yes.
Stockhausen,
Yes.
Bonin,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
Yes.
motion carries.
Now we go on to the second part of this, was Resolution 1402, providing for the sale of taxable tax increment project revenue bonds.
That's correct. What you see before you is a resolution that is a draft that will address the financing necessary in order to pay off the developer obligation in the last agreement. A couple of things have changed since this staff note was drafted. Number one, well, we recognize it slightly in the third paragraph. There is additional TID revenue coming in 2014 that will impact the borrowing amount. So the borrowing amount on this resolution is off a little. What this does is it takes the debt that was in the last agreement that was used to pay for the infrastructure of TID 5, and the city needs to pay that off in order to shift that debt to the city, or to the TID 5. Currently, the developer is paying 2.75% for this debt, and when the city looked to refinance it, we contacted the bank. They're willing to extend the same interest rate to the city of Platteville. So we will get it at the same interest rate for the same period. If we decide that that debt should pay off at a slower pace and the borrowing would last 10 years, as described initially when the City Council, the Plan Commission, and the Joint Review Board extended the TID plan, they recommended that we extend the debt to a 10-year period. And so if we did that, we would have the flexibility to extend those debt payments for a 10-year period. So the way we negotiated with the bank was, and to American Trust credit, they were willing to extend the same terms as the developer, and then anything above and beyond that was simply based off of the 5-year Treasury note plus 2%. So as a city, we have the flexibility to make it a longer debt or a shorter debt, and what this does is it gives us that flexibility.
Questions?
Question, Larry. With this approach versus the approach that we have right now, where the TIF is paying itself off, and with the current information, it will be done in 4 years, what is the advantage of doing this? Because if we go and do pay it off in 4 years with the new borrowed money, okay, it's going to be basically the same, with the exception of we're going to spend $11,000 to acquire this note, okay? And I imagine that $11,000 is basically to pay down interest or pay points. And if you figured it out, it would be basically, we'd be paying about 4.2, 4.4% interest over that time frame, if you use that $11,000 involved in it.
Well, I don't know how the 11,000 breaks down as far as points. We were given that as the loan fee for the issuance.
Yeah, and a lot of times when you do that, you can buy points for interest.
So you've already confirmed that and broken it down? The 11,000 buys points?
I just did of the 11,000, I just did a random quick figure, okay? But my whole point is, we're gonna spend $11,000 to do something we don't have to do, and the TIF will pay itself off in the same time frame, okay? The only thing it does is, if you don't want to pay it off in that short time frame, which I think is a good thing, then you have a way of having money borrowed out there. Now let me ask you this. If you have money, if your payment to the bank would be, let's say, a couple $100,000 a year less, that way you have an extra $200,000 to work with, okay? Now, that can't be used in anything else except in that TIF, because it's still part of the TIF, is that correct? You can't go somewhere else and build something with that money.
Well, yes and no. If the payment were stretched out over a 10-year period, then the payment to the debt would be lower than what it is now.
Correct.
The difference would be, in your example, 200,000. You could use that to make improvements in TID 5, as you noted, but also I believe under the TID amendments, we could use it as a donor relationship to TID 7, which is the downtown. So in some respects, you would have the flexibility of using the taxes and the money paid in TID 5 to help the downtown. So you could take Walmart taxes and use it to support downtown development.
That would be the same way as if we designated any other TIF to help TIF 7, correct? We'd have to
Right.
designate, okay. But aren't there restrictions on what that money could be used for when it helped another TIF?
All of the restrictions are laid out in the TID amendments that we approved last fall, I believe.
Yeah, well, we had to put that
Yep.
into play.
And I want to go back. You moved on off of your initial comment, and I want to tell you that when we borrow this money with the bank, we have the flexibility to keep the payments exactly as they are,
Correct.
or we can extend it over a 10-year period.
Right.
And I think that it would be wise to keep it as they are until such point that we have something that we want to spend the money on, in which case then we can extend it. We have that flexibility within this borrowing.
I was just a little afraid that it was going to jump right into a long-term debt instead of getting this thing paid off in 4 years. And that we can't control unless,
We will have the option to use the money if we see fit, or to continue to use it to pay off the principal. There is no prepayment penalty, so you can continue to pay if you decide that that's what you want to do. Barb, did you have a question too?
go ahead, Mark.
I said, I wouldn't consider 10 years long-term debt
Okay.
a lot of our long-term debt is a lot longer than 10 years.
I was using 10 years as an example. Let me see here real quick how far they
And
extended
the
out.
maturity date would be 9/30/25,
Okay, so it's a little longer than that.
11 years.
Yeah.
But versus 4 years, that's a considerable lot more time.
But I think that if we recall the discussions we had during the time when we were amending the TIFs and the TID plans, we talked about the need for assistance in the downtown TIF, and the fact that this is really the best performing TIF. And my recollection is we were also going to use it to support some of our economic development activities in terms of perhaps marketing and promotion and those kind of things. Do I recall that correctly?
Well, I can tell you we would certainly have that flexibility.
Right.
I haven't looked to the TIF plans specifically looking for that at this point. But if we did decide to do that, it would be in the TIF plans.
There's a statement in here in this document that I'm looking at about this resolution that says, our bond counsel is working on this at time of council packet assembly.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That paragraph opens with the fact that the city will receive $930,000 in TID revenue in 2014. When bond counsel established the resolution and the paperwork, they started working on it as far ago as early as October of last year. And so they were using the debt level that we were at that point. Well, if we refinance in January of 2014, we can apply the 2014 payment of $930,000 to the principal before we refinance. Therefore, the number in the borrowing has to be reduced, and we were unable to get that correction done before the packet was printed. So if you roll it over onto the resolution, you'll see a dollar amount. Now therefore be it resolved in number 1. That dollar amount is incorrect. We have to take significant money off of that to accommodate the payment received in 2014. Do you see the dollar amount?
The $4,391,000?
Yep. And so if you assume from looking at that and reading the last paragraph, we would end up removing, I believe it's $830,000 off of that before we actually go forward with the borrowing.
And bond counsel, is that Jeff Belanger?
No, that is Quarles and Brady.
Okay.
Jeff Belanger is our bond advisor.
Okay. So this is Quarles. Okay.
Yep.
So if this resolution, then that number should not be used in any motion that's made, or do we say,
You could recommend approval of the resolution as corrected by staff, and we'll put the right number in there. It's, to give you an idea, it's the 4.3 million minus 830,000. Wayne, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
And then
I'm sorry, just a minute, Dwayne?
just to clarify that 4,391,000 that we're talking about, that was the amount that was back in October. So there'd be obviously some additional interest on that amount, and then if you subtract off 830,000, if you're going to apply it to rather and reduce the other borrowing by 100,000. We don't have the exact number at this point in time, and that's what Jeff was referring to when we got back at that, because they had been using the wrong number. So that's why it originally said approximately that amount, and it will be reduced probably at least 800,000 or something like that once the interest is computed.
And number 2 on that resolution says that the interest rate, maturity schedule, other details with respect to the bond shall be subject to approval by subsequent resolution. So we would be,
You're going to do this all over again next time. For both of the debt issues, it'll be here. Jeff Belanger will be here to talk to you about the sale and the schedule at our next council meeting. Once you give us approval to go forward with this, he'll do the sale and come to you at our next meeting where he'll bring the sale to you and ask you to approve it. It's the same process we've done for other debt in the past.
Okay, I move adoption of resolution number 1402, providing for the sale of taxable tax increment project revenue bonds. TID number 5, with a note that the amount in the draft is incorrect and will be corrected by staff.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. And we'll vote.
Doss,
Yes.
Stackhausen,
Yes.
Bonin,
Yes.
Killian,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
No.
motion carries.
Next item is Resolution 1401, providing for the sale of $5,600,000 general obligation promissory notes.
This is our second issue of the evening. In 2010, the city of Platteville built a new police department, and that was funded with Build America bonds to the tune of $4.7 million. Principally, this debt is the refinancing of those Build America bonds. It was under the stimulus program, as explained in the staff note, where the federal government covered some of the interest payments on those bonds. It was a special program called Build America that the federal government did. When the federal government went into their sequester, let's see, that was last fall or earlier this spring, that impacted their ability to subsidize those bonds. And as you can see in the staff note, initially they were going to be paying 35% of the interest paid, and the city is now getting only 26.3% of the interest from the federal government. To Jeff Belanger's credit, he put a stipulation in our bond issue that said if the federal government ever defaulted on their share of it, we would have the right to refinance our bonds. They have created what's called a material event, and we are able to refinance these bonds at a all-time low interest rate. In addition to those bonds, we've decided to include the 2014 Capital Improvement Plan budget for Broadway Street and TIF District Number 6 for the stormwater pond, as well as funding for a bike trail in TID number 5. You'll note on your staff note that the Broadway Street project was approximately $1.3 million. $385,000 of the borrowing is for TIF District Number 6 stormwater pond, and another $100,000 is for TIF 5 bike trail project. I can tell you that the $100,000 for TIF 5 bike trail project is also no longer actual. We have a more specific amount, and it'll be closer to $50,000 for the bike trail. Together, all of these projects equal the $5.6 million for the bond. Does anyone have any questions for me regarding these projects?
I have one little one, Larry, you know I would on this one. the
I'm
bike
ready.
trail. When the money apparently was put in the budget on the TIF end of it, they showed a breakdown on the engineering costs, so much and so on. Where are we getting the savings from?
Well, in the budget, the engineering, I believe, was 50 and the infrastructure was 75.
Right.
The estimate that came in for this bike trail portion was 75,000 for total construction and engineering, of which we got a substantial grant from Walmart for 24,000. So the difference is give or take about 50,000 that we need to finance, and that would be a TIF 5 eligible expense. And the engineering portion of that budget initially was planned to help with the engineering costs of extending a different portion of the bike trail. At some point, staff and I have had conversations about doing a trail along Business 151 from Mineral Street to the First Wisconsin Bank and Trust, and part of that expense would be engineering eligible, part of the engineering expense would be TIF eligible. At this time, that's not a project that made it to the CIP or to our debt project right now. So I don't know that the city council is interested in doing that. We haven't had a discussion on that yet. So that's why I believe that the dollar amount is more accurately reflected, closer to 50,000.
Okay, 50,000, but what's the whole total price of the package then? Not just 50,000?
The total
Total price of what we have in the budget plus what we have to borrow. What's the whole total package?
For
what?
Bike trail.
Well, the bike trail that has been discussed and agreed to is the 75,000.
Okay.
That's an estimate. We still have to bid it out and get the exact numbers. And the reason we're going forward with that is because a quarter of it is being paid for by Walmart.
So our portion would be the 75, and then we add Walmart's 24 onto that to help out? Or they're part of that 75?
They're part of the 75.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Larry. In the last information about the resolution providing for the sale of taxable tax increment revenue bonds, there was a note that you wrote that says, with the city receiving approximately $930,000 in TIF revenues in 2004, the amount proposed in the resolution will be likely reduced. We talked about that. Goes on to say, our financial advisor is recommending that we reduce the proposed resolution amount by $830,000 and reduce the other borrowing by $100,000. What does that mean? And is this the other borrowing that is being referenced? And then it goes on to say this will enable $100,000 in 2014 TIF revenues be used for 2014 proposed projects in TIF 5. So tell me what that all means and if these two things are related. Because I'm just having a little trouble here understanding.
Yes.
So what does that mean? The other borrowing?
They are related, because we're talking about $930,000 being applied, but we're talking about $100,000 but coming off the other borrowing.
Which other borrowing?
This borrowing, the $5.6 million, and then becomes $5.5 million. And we'll have these final numbers at the next meeting between these two here.
Okay. And you'll have a nice detail of what this borrow is for on each one, and how much of this borrow is for each point. Because this makes no sense at all.
I agree, it is confusing. It will be clear, much clearer next time.
Other questions? Then are we ready for a motion?
I move we approve resolution 1401, providing for the sale of general obligation promissory notes in an amount of about, but likely not, $5.6 million.
Up to.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. More information to come. We'll vote.
Doss?
Yes.
Stackhausen?
Yes.
Bonin?
Yes.
Killian?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Steiner?
yes.
Den?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, the next item, Resolution 1403, to combine voting wards and polling places for the February 18th, 2014 primary election. And Jan, I believe you are going to present this.
Yeah, I'd asked for this to be on the agenda.
And just so that everybody notices, they have the information on their desk in front of them. Jan had passed this out. Okay.
Okay, we have 3 candidates vying for 1 alderman position on the council. So we'll need to have a primary election on February 18th to reduce that number to 2. The Grant County Clerk notified me that this office is the only contest on the ballot, so the city is responsible for the entire cost of the election. Typically, the city, school district, and county share in the cost of an election. We do not expect a high turnout at this election. The city currently has 8 wards and 4 polling sites to staff at 2 locations. For this election only, I'm proposing to combine the polling places and the reporting units into 1 at the National Guard Armory. I talked with Councilor Doss about it because this is her district, and she had asked that the residents receive correspondence notifying them, you know, that there will be the change in their polling place. And I did talk with campus, and they are willing to send out something to all the students to let them know, too, that it would be changed in the event that this is approved. So my recommendation is to propose to adopt the attached resolution, which authorizes combining the 4 polling places to 1 polling place, the National Guard Armory at 475 North Water Street, and 1 reporting unit for all 4 districts for the February 18th, 2014 spring election.
And I would note that this is for 1 election only, and it does cause some difference for the folks in the district that I represent, but I believe that if all the students are notified, my district includes all of the residence halls except Roundtree Commons, and so they can actually segregate and send email to those students to advise them. And then I asked that a postcard be sent to all the residents of the district, whether or not they had ever voted, saying, for this election and this election only, for this primary, the polling place will be the National Guard Armory. I think it's probably worth the $3,000.
Yeah, I don't think that we actually mentioned that, but this would result in a savings of approximately $3,300. Any other discussion? Is there a motion?
I make a motion to adopt Resolution 1403 authorizing a change in polling place for February 18th, 2014 primary election.
I'll second it.
A motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss?
Yes.
Stackhausen?
Yes.
Bonin?
Yes.
Killian?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Steiner?
Yes.
Den?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next item is a loan to Pioneer Property Management for an affordable multifamily project. Larry?
Yes, the city of Platteville, I guess I'd like to introduce Brian Fritz to come forward with his proposal. The city of Platteville has been asked to consider a loan to Brian Fritz and Pioneer Property Management to help with an affordable multifamily housing development. And I'd like to ask Brian to come forward and talk to us a little bit about what he's proposing.
Brian, just for the record, if you want to give your name and address.
Talk loud enough, that'll be screaming at you guys.
You need to speak into that because it records it.
Brian Fritz, I'm for Pioneer Property Management, 1005 Menage Drive, Platteville, Wisconsin. Thank you again. I've talked to most of you all at length and numerous times about this, so I'll keep it short and sweet. We are proposing to build a 24-unit multifamily affordable housing community where the old radio station is. We will be applying for tax credits through the WIDA program at the end of January here. And with that process, one of the things that is involved in the competitive spirit of the application is the financial commitment from the communities that the property were involved in. So what I have done is met with the council members and the city and have proposed a loan instead of a grant or TIF financing that will meet my criteria for for that application from there. So one thing, part of it is that you see in there is the improvements that have already been done for that site. I bought the site, it's annoying. I bought that site last year, and as they were doing those road improvements, I met with the city and Delta 3 to go over what our plans were with that. So as you can see, there has work that's already been done on the street, and that specifically for the property, and that is notated in there. The loan portion is what we're requesting is a loan amount of $150,000 over 30 years, amortized out with a balloon after 15 years at the interest rate of 3%.
Questions for Mr. Fritz?
So if it's a balloon after 16 years, then you could be asked to pay it off.
Well, yeah, we absolutely have to pay it off. I mean, the balloon payment, it's amortized over 30 years, so 360 months, but after year 15, whatever the balance of that loan is at that time will become due. I guarantee the tax credits for 15 years, so that's why I have to have it out through that amount of time. Again, you know, I want to make sure everyone understands the terms of the loan. There's no anticipation to have the loan out for that amount of time, but again, you need to understand that it is an amortized over 360 months, and then we would have payment due in full after year 15.
Any other? Yep.
And I know there's a stated interest rate in here. And I'm assuming the city is going to have to go borrowing this money, so Dwayne, somebody, can we borrow money at this?
Our proposal was not to borrow money. If we borrowed money for an economic development purpose, it would be taxable to whomever issues us the loan. Our proposal was to take it from the fund balance. And that will require a 2/3 vote.
Question about, never mind, go ahead, Brian, I don't want to interrupt you. I'll talk about that later.
No, I'm here to answer questions. Again, I thank everyone for their time. I've been able to say my piece. So,
Well, my question would be to Larry then. Larry, would that affect our percentage on fund balance?
Well, our fund management plan policy requires that we have 20% of our expenses of our budget expenses available in our fund balance. We are anticipating that we will be slightly over that. To be exact, we can't. We won't know until the audit is done to know exactly where we are as of December 31st. We're anticipating that we're going to be slightly over the 20, but to do this loan, we would probably dip below the 20, 19 and a half to make the loan work.
That's not normal practice for us, is it?
Well, last year our fund balance was $400,000 less than the 20%, and we had to do a transfer in mid-year. So we're trying to keep with the plan and keep with the guidelines to keep 20% in our fund balance. But I don't know that that's not going to occur, because as of December 31st of this year, it's going to be at over 20%. And by December 31st of next year, it could very well be over 20% again. So
Basically, we don't know until the audit.
Right.
And
we won't be able to answer that question until we have the audits done. And if it does drop below 20%, it's going to be of a small nature. It'll be very minor.
And there's all kinds of things that affect whether fund balance drops below or goes above. I mean, a winter that's mild may result in money that's not spent. A winter that's not.
A vacancy in a position.
Yep. In additional plowing or whatever. So I think that, that's a target. It's not a fixed thing. I would say that the RDA, Mr. Fritz came to the RDA meeting, and while the RDA concentrates the majority of its work in the downtown district, the RDA was involved when Roundtree Commons was built, and the property that building was built on was declared blighted. And so we did ask about you know, that's the only way the RDA could get involved and make a loan. The RDA is supportive of this project, but could only make a loan for this, if the property were declared blighted. And to be declared blighted actually requires about, I would say, 4 or 5 meetings of the council and the RDA, because there have to be public hearings, it has to be designated by the RDA, then it has to come to the council, and then there has to be a plan, and then it has to come before the RDA, and then it has to come before the council. So it's a long, drawn-out process. So I just want to reaffirm that on behalf of the RDA, I sent a letter to all council members indicating support for this type of project. I think this kind of housing is important housing for our community.
I want to echo that. I think that it's very needed. This type of housing is very needed in the city of Platteville. My only concern was, where was the money going to come from?
Other discussion?
I have a question for Brian. You call it affordable multifamily housing. Does WIDA have a definition for affordable, because it is a relative term?
It is. You hear a lot of things. Workforce housing, affordable housing, moderate income housing, what it's called. I think the best thing for me to do is just kind of reiterate, and if I, hopefully I give that, is everything's based on an income. Okay, so when we set out, it's a percentage of the area and median income of what stuff is based on. So when I go and I apply for a project, I have to set forth in that application exactly how many units I'm going to do, what income levels I'm going to go after, and commit to that. And that goes with my land use restriction agreement then. Okay, so just to give you an idea again, when we talk about that, I pulled Grant County's numbers, which is based on, this is for the year 2014. They adjust every year. It's very minimal. So it was less than $100 on either side over the last 4 years or so. So for example, a family of 4, a 60% income level would be less than a gross income of $35,160 a year. Okay. For a 30% level, is some of our units, a small portion, is less than $17,580 a year. Now, with that, when it sets, I have maximum rents that I can charge to those people. Part of the benefit, as I just described to a lot of you guys, I'm giving a financial mechanism, which are these credits, which I take out and sell in the open market. And with that, that gets me my equity where I can actually cash flow these properties and get with the lower income levels and the rents. So, for example, if we look at a 4-bedroom, 30% unit, my rent right now, pro forma, is less than $400, $395 a month.
For a 4-bedroom?
For a 4-bedroom, okay? 1,268 square feet. So if we look, the majority of my units, when I look, are going to be that 60% area and median income. So, when I look at this area, and this is the unique thing about Platteville when we set in, and different when I do buildings in Chicago or larger urban areas, we have that income level, $35,160 for a young family. You're not doing too bad around here. So, and that's just not Platteville, that's more of rural communities in general in the state of Wisconsin. So when we look at a 3-bedroom unit, 1,150 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, my rents are gonna be less than $800 a month. Okay, so right now, those are very difficult to find in this community generally, because there's a lot of college kids in them, if they do exist. If they're not, what you are seeing in a lot of the housing is you're seeing people go into smaller apartments than maybe what their family should be going into. We've got a lot of 1 and 2-bedroom units in this town. Okay, we don't have, from an apartment standpoint, and home ownership and single-family home rentals isn't for everyone, and that's taking out the university aspect of housing on this town. There's not a lot of inventory. So, again, I own over 60 units in town, or 60 apartment units in town already. I can't keep up fast enough. The minute one's empty, I've got a line a mile long for people. We're shipping individuals that meet these criteria off to our properties as far off as Prairie du Chien. And that's something, how I got involved from this level and looking is, why am I going around and doing all this stuff over here when I need it in my hometown? When we need more units like this for our people. And I know I brought it up before and I'll bring it up again. I really believe that our declining enrollment in our school district is tied to this when it comes. And when you look as we grow as a community, we've gone up in population and drastically reduced from an enrollment standpoint in our school districts. And there's a lot of good things there, but we are losing bodies outside of this community. And they're coming in, they're working in Platteville, and then taking their dollars and not spending them in our businesses right out the highway. So that's where we've come and look in two things. Listen, I've got a bunch of units and I've got a waiting list, and I know that I can fill it if we get a building done. The second part is trying to bring that back in, and I've been a little unique in my approach of what I normally do when I go into a community with theirs. I've tried to talk and collaborate because I don't want to be part of a TIF. I want to be able to pay taxes. I want to be able to do this, and I want to keep my incomes. I want to put a nice product out there and keep my rents as low as possible. So we get the people back in town, we keep them here as long-term residents.
All right. Any other questions?
Will you have any market rate apartments?
I don't think so. I know when I talked to you guys originally, I had looked at that and was part of it, and it was, again, the reason I would put market rate units in the building is an incentive. I'm given points, and as complex and convoluted as the process is, it's pretty simple. 2 beats 1, 3 beats 2. When the credits are gone, the credits are gone. So that's why I looked at it. And after going back, again, I think we've got a lot of market units here, okay, in town. There's availability. I think I'm better off looking, and hopefully if the council approves this, and I have that with the funding that I have, I can do a 100% tax credit building. All 24 units will be affordable housing.
You need to rent to a family? What I'm getting at is, would you be renting to 4 students?
Absolutely not. So here's one rule that comes from the compliance side of it. The only way I can rent to a student is if they are either married or they have a child. Otherwise, they're not allowed. And from a compliance standpoint, and the way this works is these tax credit are regulated by the IRS, okay? So if they were to come in, and I have inspections and compliance reviews multiple times a year, and they were to find that I have an ineligible tenant, so whether they make too much money or a college student, I lose credits on that unit, okay? Essentially, I owe a gigantic bill. So we take that very seriously, so.
What about 2 unmarried couple with children?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's no restriction on, you know, anything else other than student housing, okay? And the reason it's a good thing because I'm not taking, it's privately owned, privately funded, but there are credits involved that the state administers. I'm not taking funding to kind of backdoor a college housing unit or flip it to condos or anything like that. So it's a very good rule.
All right, other discussion, otherwise we'd be ready to move on with a motion.
Well, I move
Thank you,
that
Brian.
we accept this loan proposal to Pioneer Property Management for an affordable multifamily project for $150,000 at 3%, coming out of the general fund balance.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll vote.
Doss?
Yes.
Stackhausen?
Yes?
Bonin?
Yes.
Killian?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Steiner?
Yes.
Den?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
With the council's approval, so to speak, I would like to change the order of the information and discussion. The reason being that we have a presentation tonight on the City Hall Task Force recommendation, and rather than having Troy wait until the very end of our information and discussion, I would like to move him first. And so, if there's no objection, I'm going to ask Troy to come forward and do the City Hall City Hall Task Force Plan reorganization now. And he did provide information which is laying on our desk. So, you want to introduce yourself?
I do, thank you. I'm Troy Magida. I was asked by Eileen to be part of the City Hall Task Force and was asked to be chair of this task force, so that's what brought me before you. You should have two documents here, 11 by 17, 2 pages, first and second floor, and we'll get to that. And then the other is a simple 8.5 by 11 with the title City Hall Task Force Common Council Presentation. I want to take a few minutes to tell you how we got to the recommendation, which is on the 11 by 17. I think it's important that you know what informed the recommendation. So I'll go over that briefly, and if you have questions, I can certainly answer. But then probably the meat of the discussion will be on the layout, I suspect. So you have item number 1 on the 8.5 by 11 sheet, just shows the members of the task force. And the scope of work, as provided by you all, but as a refresher, is to make a recommendation for the improvement of the building, to address deficiencies of the current City Hall for city functions, and to provide recommendations for uses of the vacant or underutilized areas of the building. We had a first meeting September 4th, and I'll focus here on the items that really informed our decisions. You can read through and ask questions as you see fit. September 4th, we started off by getting a tour of this facility throughout. Howard and his staff gave us a great tour and showed us the ins and outs and answered a lot of our questions. We were also provided with a binder that showed the past studies that were done looking at the building from various engineering firms, and that was kind of our homework. We decided at that meeting that we should survey staff in the building, identify what their needs are, both pie in the sky, what would your ideal workspace be, what are some constraints, etc. And so we left with that meeting with the assignment to develop a list of questions that we think we should ask the city staff. When I say city staff, I mean only this building. I've been corrected several times. We're only talking about the staff working in City Hall. The next meeting, we took a tour of Roundtree Gallery and the Senior Center. There had been various discussion about rolling either of those into this space, and so we felt it appropriate to visit those facilities and see what their current spaces are like. We reviewed the survey questions and came up with a survey which I went and compiled. We distributed the survey and asked for responses back on October 1st. So at the meeting then on October 2nd, we reviewed the surveys and compiled them, but we also talked about looking to neighboring communities. This isn't the first community that's had to find out what to do with an older public building. So we talked about the potential to visit a couple of these other communities to see if there are some lessons to be learned and to see how similar those projects are. And so on the October 16th meeting, we discussed 3 sites to visit. Darlington had their old high school downtown turned into a city hall building. They leased part of that city hall out to County Health and Human Services, and I think there's some other folks in there as well. But it was some good lessons learned. Again, not quite the same. They were able to sell off 4 buildings and put that money into the one. So they had a unique situation. Some folks went up to Lancaster, where the old city hall there was renovated, and again, the details I can provide for you if you want, but they had some various uses that were rolled into the older structure. And then Mineral Point, which is the city hall library, to talk with those folks about their facility, which I think just completed here recently. So from the 16th to essentially November 6th is when people visited those 3 sites. We came up with a kind of a list of questions that we thought appropriate so that we could compare equally across all 3 site visits. And we discussed those visits on the 6th. And on the November 6th meeting is when we started really coming up with different ideas about how the spaces in the City Hall building could be used. And at that point, we had 3 different versions that we thought we'd like to present and discuss. And we did so on December 11th. We met with department heads of City Hall staff, and I'm on the back page now. City Hall staff provided some, department heads, excuse me, of City Hall staff provided some really good feedback, some things we had overlooked or just inadvertently omitted, some various ideas about how their departments work together. And so they took the 3 design proposals we had, chose one, made some, I think, some really valuable modifications to that to end up at the design layout you have in front of you. The only other thing I'd like to say before we move into that is number 4 on the second page of the 8.5 by 11. There's some general considerations, building-wide considerations that will be included in the final report. These come from the surveys, and they also come from staff and decision makers of the 3 site visits. Being that it is a unanimous decision to stay in this building, and having talked with folks at these other facilities, we believe it's a good recommendation to look at the building as a whole. Don't try to do a piece here and a piece there and sort of band-aid a project. You could save some short-term cost savings, but I don't think based on what we've heard and based on it sounds like what you want, you will get the product you want. So MEP system, a comprehensive update of the system. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing is the shortcut. So heating, electrical, and the water systems. We were in the basement, and Howard gave us a great tour of the bowels of this building, and it's remarkable, and it probably could use some updating. The building enclosure, windows and doors, this is something that Mineral Point and Lancaster both kind of tried to cut some corners and save some money with some lower quality windows and doors, and they see that in the thermal enclosure of the building, and really recommended focusing on these old buildings and tightening them up, buttoning them up. Technology, there's this somewhat sad little tower that sits back in the police, where the old police station was, and as the city moves in and wrestles with its budget, it needs to be leaner and smarter. Technology is going to be a big focus, and you're going to have a newer and younger workforce that grew up with this stuff, and to focus on that and really fully fund what you need to make a smart and lean building, I think, is very important. This includes, as you see, dedicated space for a technology closet and an office space for whichever IT personnel you may have in the future. Security is something, again, when you work with your consultants as you move through the process, fully consider whatever you would need for security building-wide, whether that's cameras and key cards and key fobs and whatever else city police and city staff believe you need. Storage, we had a lot of discussion about storage because you have a lot of it, and we weren't necessarily convinced you will need a lot of it in the future. A lot of storage is going to the cloud, or it's being stored electronically off-site, and so these massive filing cabinet systems that you used to need aren't necessarily necessary anymore. With the basement also that's going to be largely wide open, you can move some of that there. So we would recommend looking towards more and more electronic data storage to reduce your space needs. And again, there's always an issue transitioning staff from paper to electronic, but as your city staff moves into retirement, the young folks aren't going to bat an eye, and they're going to expect that, and it's going to draw people here to work, I think, in a community that's ahead of the curve. So, the more you can go electronic with your storage, I think the better off you'll be. Signage and wayfinding was something that is important as folks come in to get permits or pay their taxes or what have you. We want to walk into the building and know exactly where to go. And, I think of the Dodgeville, the Health and Human Services in Dodgeville has excellent wayfinding. You walk right in, you know the building layout, you know right where you need to go, and that's a sizable building. And those are, and then aesthetics. We put this in there. I think it's hopefully common sense, but there was a lot of comments in the surveys that folks just feel like they're in kind of a rundown building. And so really, if you're going to do the building-wide work with an architect to get an approach that either returns to the historical condition or modernizes it, but makes the best use for your staff and a comfortable staff. So those are general recommendations building wide. We didn't get into very specific uses and conditions, but from what we've talked, from what we heard from staff and more importantly from the folks we've spoken with in Lancaster, Dodgeville, Lancaster, Darlington, and Mineral Point, those are some lessons learned that we wanted to present to you. Is there any questions? That was kind of a broad brush overview, but I wanted to give you kind of how we got to where we are, sir.
What's their task force feeling on the vault downstairs? Do they look at that and think that somebody want to look at it, or?
On the first floor?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a fair amount of talk about that, and I think what we came to, Howard and folks jump in, is that it probably would determine a couple of things. Do you really need that size of a vault like you used to? It's not the Wild West anymore. What are you keeping in there? And what would it take to remove it? You know, you don't need a massive metal vault anymore. Most vaults in new buildings are going to be concrete walls or grout-filled block with fire protection around it that you could put in the basement if you really had something to seal up. So if you needed that space, and if it doesn't take a wrecking ball to pull out, I would say that was an option to discuss with the architect, just to see what to do with that. And then of course the staff that does need to be in there, what is the impact to them? That would be a consideration as well. But I think the impression we had after all this discussion is that if it needs to be moved out, that would be something to put on the table. If all the conditions are right to do so. So I guess I can walk you through the colored mock-up here. You'll have a first floor and second floor, and we do have spare copies in the back if anybody is interested in grabbing one. This doesn't show existing use. This shows our proposed use. And if you have trouble interpreting the colors, please let me know. I'll start here on the west side of the building as you walk in the main entrance. On the right, sewer and water and finance. And on the left, on the north side of the building, is the city clerk and manager. Most of the folks who come in want to get in and get out and pay their bills and leaves.
In reverse.
This is proposed, not existing.
Oh, I thought this was it.
And the reason is that what we heard is that the city clerk, actually, I believe, if I remember the surveys correct, has more need of the use for the vault. So instead of having them drag across the lobby, is that correct? Am I remembering that? Okay. Instead of having
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a minute. It might be confusing because on the bottom it says existing.
It does. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Eileen. We took a plan from the binder that was given to us, and I took an actual plan and modified it. So that's an important clarification. This is not existing in terms of its uses. It's existing in terms of where the walls are and the structure. Thank you for that, Eileen. Yeah. And we can clean that up. I'll make a note to do so.
Okay, so your plan didn't look at the space and reallocate the space by taking down walls. It just looked at the space as a general, okay.
Correct, yeah, and a lot of the walls that you'll see are non-bearing, and that's where you get an architect and interior designer to figure out those spaces. We did consider how many people were in each department and thought a lot about would there be enough space to house those people. Now, you'll have to sit down with an architect to work through the details of that, but we did take into consideration the number of people in each department and their space. So you walk in, I'm a taxpayer, I'm paying my water and sewer bill. I walk in, I'm head to the road to the right, I pay my bill and I get out of there. Likewise, I need to register to vote or visit the clerk for whatever reason. I'm into the left. One thing that we heard in a survey that we thought was something to point out and to add is this kind of dark purple room. We had comments that it would be nice to have a place for absentee voters to come, sit, think about their vote, instead of having to lean over a counter or sit in a corner. And so, again, what that space would look like when it's designed is up to the architect, but to have a kind of a smaller dedicated place where they could use that. We had some comments from the council members too, that there are times when they may come in and want to visit with staff or do some preparatory work for a council meeting. So that could be something of a swing space for those two uses. And whether it's in that particular corner or elsewhere, you know, in what is the northwest corner of the building is up to the architects, but that seemed like a good place for that. Going further back to the east, on the northeast, the only thing I'll point out in brown here, we have restrooms. You'll see what is, I think what was existing, what was in the original building was a restroom with an exterior entrance. We put that back in for picnic in the park and what have you. If you have a unisex restroom, I think there'd be great benefit there to the citizens. Just east of there, on the top of your sheet, the large blue section is a combined space for planning and development, for housing, for public works, and for recreation. There was some discussion about putting senior center or Roundtree here. The way the floor in the back part of that building is cut up, and the way that the north side of the building is one way for drop off and pickup, it's not really conducive for seniors to get out to cross. There's also, if you want to maintain the historical integrity of the exterior of the building, you don't want to put an awning. So we kind of ruled out the use of that space for senior centers or anything else. However, if you've got a building contractor coming in or an engineer that wants to get in and out, not track muddy boots through the building, they could pull into the outside parking lots, walk in, see Howard, see whomever they need to see back in that room without, again, tracking throughout the whole building. The idea being that you have customers to serve, they want to get in, they want to get out, and this, I think, would facilitate the flow of personnel as they come in the building. In the middle corridor, then, behind the elevator, I should say just east of the elevator, you'll see two sections here. One's kind of a darkish green, which is centrally located, and we had the recommendation, we received the recommendation to include some space for an IT, what we'll call a technology closet. That's where your main tower is and your switches, and also an office space for an IT individual. And that's important to be centrally located because those cables go from those towers throughout the building. And I think that would be, as it's kind of a closed-off, centrally located space, we thought that would be a good use. Just down from there, then, is a centralized break room for staff members. What this plan here does, and so in the top right, by and large, the auditorium stays the way it does. You'll see a tiny orange space, which I'll talk about briefly, but what this first floor allows is for all city staff to have their offices on the first floor. You won't have anybody on the second floor. And we got a lot of good reception and good input that led to that decision, and then good reception for that layout to have everybody on the first floor. So the second floor plan, then, if you want to flip over, and I can walk through that briefly. Top right of the page is still the auditorium in red, no change there. The top left is Roundtree Gallery. This room here, actually, that we're standing in, with the lighting and the open space and the tall ceilings, would be we thought, or we received the word actually, that it would be an excellent gallery space. Easy access to stairs. There is we just kind of left it all Roundtree Gallery, but we had a lot of discussion about that space back there and making that, it allows for a small office for whomever would be operating a Roundtree, as well as that sort of kitchenette area back there. If you're having some sort of event or festivity, you can either have a caterer set up or you can put your coffee out or what have you. But as a public space, it offers a lot, and it's fairly self-contained as well. The small room, then, just to make a note, to the right of the exit here, in the back of the room, is going to be, or is recommended to be, the colors merge. That's actually janitorial. So imagine you're setting up for something here. You need tables. That'd be a good place for table storage and something like that. So then on the west side of the building, what is currently, I'm turning around here, what is currently Public Works, I believe, Howard, yeah, is we're recommending to be the new council chambers. The space there seems to be sufficient, especially, again, once all the interior non-bearing walls come down, you'd have a pretty good sized space there, considering the average turnout of your meetings. For those meetings where you do have a larger turnout, and I'm informed you generally know when those meetings are going to be, if there's a hot button issue or what have you, that's why you have on the first floor that funny little orange square. The thought being that once you put the money into your audio video equipment and your technology, if you had a larger meeting, you could prepare by setting up at the stage and have room for a larger audience. And again, that recommendation is based on the information we receive, that you generally know when a large meeting is, and that the building will be wired for audio, video, and the building, again, including the auditorium, will be wired for the audio, video services. So just to the south then, I'm back on the second floor, just to the south of the council chambers is just a general community room, potentially rental space if you find somebody there for offices. This is the GAR room. Quite frankly, we ran out of things to put there, and as we discussed what we could do, well, you know, potentially have a renter, potentially somebody wants to move in there for a small office. Maybe you have another community room. Again, I think of the newer building in Dodgeville, the Health and Human Services buildings. On a regional level, we always have trouble finding good, free, wide open area rooms to have public meetings in. And we almost always end up in Dodgeville because that's a really great room they have there. One consideration would be to make this room for the community, for any kind of public meetings that you would want to have or public gatherings. You have a pretty nice space here to do that, should you want to do so. And then the last portion here is the southwest. It's kind of this dark and muddy room. The surveys returned asking for conference rooms of various sizes. A lot of staff size, one-on-one or staff size conference rooms. Two to maybe a 2 to 4, a room that will accommodate 2 to 4 people to talk in private, as well as a committee room. I was in here earlier for the Historic Preservation Commission, and we're in this massive room, and there's like 5 of us, you know. And so if you have or the task force, if you have a committee-sized room, instead of monopolizing a much larger room, you could go in there and have your privacy and meet as well. So again, without looking towards the layout of the walls, that space would be is recommended to be dedicated as conference rooms, committee rooms, and 2 to 3 small group meeting rooms. And then I think the last thing we're recommending here is between the auditorium on the second floor and these conference rooms is to, let's see here, is to make another upstairs restroom. Currently, I believe we just have the small one, which is kind of behind the trophy case there somewhere. Or are they on the other side of the room by the stairwell?
I don't think most council people even know it's back there, but.
Well, there you have it. So especially if you're having, if you have a Roundtree Gallery up here and you have those sort of public gathering events, you're certainly going to want to have a restroom facility upstairs. And that is directly above the first floor restroom. So in terms of layout and plumbing and so on, it shouldn't be a high engineering feat to undertake. So again, I hope that wasn't too fast, but those are the recommendations we came with and kind of the reasons that we came to them and how we got to them. I'll be happy to field any questions and the folks who were part of the planning process too. Sir, Ken.
Do you have any recommendations as to how to proceed? Do you have any recommendations as far as phases? You're talking about the whole building, so what should be done first and second, third, fourth? Or all at one time? Or?
Yeah, we didn't get into that. There's a lot of ways you could handle it. I mean, from experience, you could wrestle with an occupied remodel and shuffle people around the room, shuffle people around the building. If you had a facility, you could just kick everybody out for a year and a half, knock it out, and move them back in. It depends on a lot of things, I suppose. What sort of cost the various scenarios would incur. Maybe it's cheaper to do an occupied remodel. Maybe your contractors would find it cheaper to get everybody out of the building and do the whole work wholesale. There's some service, I don't know what to call them, maybe some policy decisions that you all should make. How much disruption do you want and can you tolerate for, say, an occupied remodel if you have somebody making a lot of noise and construction work right next to the clerk's office or wherever? You know, those are some decisions I think you all should be having with your staff and the architect or whoever you hire to undertake the work. But there's a lot of ways you can go about it. And I spent some time building schools, and we've done both. It really comes down to what your staff and the citizens can accommodate in terms of working around construction, safety factors, construction laydown. All your materials have to go somewhere during construction. So how do you accommodate all that? And those are the things that your architect and your engineer will be able to help you out with.
Well, I'm thinking about budget. Are we gonna spread this out over a number of years?
I can tell you a contractor would love to have
year?
everybody out of this building and out of their way. And you would probably see some savings in that if they don't have to stop and start and work and worry about safety and those sort of things. But again, where are they going to go? Maybe you have to rent a space. So there's some, I suppose there's some scenario planning that you all would have to do with your architect to figure out what those costs are and again, what sort of disruption might occur to city operations.
So really, I think what it comes down to, Ken, because we had a brief discussion on your question during our meetings, but ultimately, it's going to be up to the council to decide what kind of money
Yes.
to allocate, and we probably won't have a good idea on that until we actually have an architect look at the building. Give us some idea of what needs to be done in what way. And then the question is, Troy says, do you start with the mechanicals? But in order to do that, you probably need to know what you're gonna do with the rest of the building, so one thing leads to another. It isn't isolated.
I have one quick question for you. With IT units now, are they required to be put more like in a computer room for air conditioning and monitoring quality? Or can you have smaller rooms that just have their own units in them? Because I was wondering, with the way the walls are set up in here, how do you duct work into that to maintain things?
You cut a hole in the wall.
Okay.
You
This
know,
building would
again,
fall down if you did that.
We talked a lot of different scenarios. I suppose the bottom line is you could do anything to this building you want to, but it's gonna, the more holes you cut in a structural wall, the more money you're gonna rack up. But you know, it's centrally located. Again, if you talk to an IT individual and they have to run cables throughout, you'll generally see those centrally located. So I'm not gonna discuss how to get ductwork in there and temperature control stuff. That wasn't really our scope. Again, we were looking at the flow of the building and the layout in the spaces, and I hope I'm not being invasive, but evasive. I may be invasive as well, but that's not what we were hired, set up to discuss. So,
thank you.
Sure.
So when do you bring the next proposal in?
Yes.
When does the committee bring the next proposal in? Or the
This is-
final plan?
Oh,
Final report.
I was gonna say, yeah. Well,
Final report.
you know, I guess speaking for the task force and the guy who's got it write a report for you, I can start writing something, and by and large, it will be what you see here. This is outline form, and it will include these documents, but it'll be certainly cleaned up and a little more professional. But I didn't start typing away until I knew the council was comfortable with the approach. So.
I'm very comfortable with it.
When you went, oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
I missed some of your meetings, but when you talked to the staff, they were comfortable too with your plans?
Yeah, well, department heads we spoke with in person. We didn't speak with all the staff in person, but this final plan actually reflects the department head, city hall department head input, and it was really beneficial actually. The folks who not only have to live here every day, but manage staff who live here every day offered some really good advice, and I believe they all felt pretty good with what we came away with. Something, welcome to correct me.
We're good, I think.
I do like your idea of having all the city staff, the departments all on the main floor. I think that's nice for the public. It's easily accessible. Good job.
I also think it's good to have public space within the building that can be used as conference rooms by groups within our city, because, you know, Troy, I agree. Sometimes it's just really hard to find a place in our community to have a meeting of whatever group you're having. And so to have some public space, and if this progresses, then I would strongly encourage some of our staff to talk with the folks at UW Platteville about how they manage the gallery space so that it's a multi-use space. Because I also believe that's possible, to use a gallery as a multi-use space. I mean, frankly, at UW Platteville, there are often dinners in the art gallery.
And that was one comment that was made, the fact that the auditorium is already in the building, that improvements are being made to the auditorium. We anticipate more usage of that building, or that auditorium. And so if you had the auditorium there and they had a function and wanted to have something if the Roundtree Gallery were to locate here, then if you wanted to have a reception of some sort, you could have that in this space as a Roundtree Gallery prior to an event, let's say at the auditorium. So there would be, I think, opportunities for working together.
Plus, there's just plain more space for the Roundtree Gallery.
It is, yes. One nice thing about the space here, which is now the break room, would be, as Troy said, there's a kitchen there which could be used for receptions. It could also be used for classroom art events. So,
And there's an elevator.
and there's an elevator. That's right. So, any other questions or comments?
I just have one. I think it's an excellent utilization of the space that this old building has. You guys did a very good job in how you utilized the space and put it in perspective.
Thank you. We'll let the task force know.
I guess the other thing I would say is that as the council looks at this, we do need to be aware of security issues, because frankly, city hall functions happen at a certain time of the day. Gallery functions and auditorium functions may happen at different times of a day. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that if we're going to put public space in this building, we have to be ready to make that public space accessible more than, 8 to 5 or 9 to 3, Monday through Friday. So we have to build in that accessibility and security for accessibility.
Well, that was part of the reason why it's time to have, why I brought that up, is that all these points, it is time to make some hard decisions and move forward. This building is beautiful, and if we don't do something now, it's gonna collapse in itself. And we've also been piecemealing all the time. The last 5 months that I've been on this council, there's always been a request for something or another, and this is a real good plan. The committee worked really hard.
That's a good segue. Troy, would you just read for the record the members of the
Of course.
committee?
This list includes a couple of folks, staff members who weren't officially part of the group, but who gave us some significant technical assistance. Dan Allen, member of staff who assisted us. Paul Budden, Howard Crowford, again staff. Kay Halker, myself, Troy Magid, Eileen Nichols, Milt Rui, Cheryl Schmieder, thank you, Barb Stockhausen, and Jerry Zalke.
And how do you pronounce your last name?
Magid.
What was it?
Magid.
Is the D pronounced?
The D is pronounced, yes. My Ohio accent doesn't do a very good job of it, but it does.
There was some accent.
So, and then city manager offered a lot of assistance as well. So city staff were indebted to for their input.
We got a very good response when the survey was sent out to the staff and in the building, and as Troy said, we were concentrated on the people who actually work in this building, and they gave us a lot of good input. They really did. We really appreciate that. And then obviously meeting with the department heads later, that was very helpful as well.
Well, I just want to emphasize that I am certainly going to watch this plan progress, that I don't want to put it on the back of our long list of priorities. I would like to have it in the middle, if not to the beginning of our priorities, because the city hall needs to, the building needs to help in our development as a community, improve. We're good, but we can be better.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much, and thank all the members of the task force.
Thank you.
All right. So that, again, looking at the time and knowing that we have a closed session, I will go through the information and discussion items. You can spend as much or as little time as you wish to on each one this evening. The first one is a rental license inspection program, ordinances and fees. We have, I think, a good staff report in the packet from Joe Carroll, Community Planning and Development. my preference really would be to have this on for information and discussion one more time before we would do any action, because I think there's a lot of information there and we would want to have time to discuss it. But does anybody have any questions tonight that they would like to ask or comments?
I have a question. I mean, I see that, you know, I'm not prepared to say 70, 85, 90, whatever. My question is, how was this information generated? Was there a study done of similar communities? Was this, so I'd like to know the source. You know, whenever you do proposals, there should be sources for information, so I'd like to know sources. And that can be put in a staff note or whatever. Doesn't have to be done tonight, but I'd like to know the sources of how this was arrived at.
It's real easy. It was my idea based on conversations from the rental inspection task force and, well, both of them that met, that came up with suggestions on making a schedule instead of having a flat fee that's more equitable based on the amount of time. So there is no other input from other communities. It's my ideas based on that input.
Okay, and are those notes from prior task forces available on the website or anything that I can go back and look at?
They used to be. I don't think they are anymore.
Okay, could somebody make those available, prior notes from some of these?
If you want to read them, I can make them available. There's a whole lot of them.
I'd like them to be electronically so others could read them too.
Sure.
I'm also I'm still a little bit confused about why we would not want, I understand that we've had past rental inspectors that we've had issues, but I'm still a little confused by the note that we don't really want to bid this out. So I will still express that I have some discomfort with that. Willing to be persuaded, but I still have discomfort.
Oh, I know what you said.
Okay, Barb,
We can't hardly hear you.
are having trouble hearing you at this end of the, this
probably
end.
because
So,
I'm
yeah,
not
probably because
sitting
you're not
up.
sitting up to and talking in the microphone.
Probably because
so
I'm not
if-
sitting up to the
If
microphone.
you wanna,
I'm just
if
sitting
you wanna
back.
just repeat your last comment,
You're
perhaps.
going to sleep on us.
No, I was just relaxing about it, Dick. I said I still, I note that in Joe's staff note, he said he's not in favor of requesting bids or proposals relative to this contract. I'm still somewhat bothered by that. I'm not sure, and I understand we've had other rental services, but I'm still somewhat bothered by not looking at the contract, which is exclusive of the fees. But the fees are supposed to pay for the contract too, so.
Okay, any other questions or comments on that? And as I said, my preference would be to put this on for information and discussion again.
Yep.
Not for action next time. All right, next item is the WPPA union contract. Larry?
Yes, our previous WPPA union contract expired December 31st, 2013. In the fall of 2013, the city, myself, the police chief, and attorney Jim Quorum initiated discussions and negotiations with the WPPA union. Enclosed in your packet is a proposal that would establish a new union contract for the years 2014 to 2016. You can see from the cover page some of the points in the contract, some of the changes. We did include a red line version. There should have been a red line version in here, yep, for your review. We're very happy with the results of our discussions with WPPA, and we believe our union is negotiated in good faith, and we think we have a good proposal for you.
Question?
That means they're changes.
I am confused, and I've tried to read through it, the section 4 on group medical insurance. I would need further explanation as to what that change really is.
Which page, Barbara?
I don't know, on mine it's
16.
page 239, but
16.
I don't think it's probably page 239 on yours.
That's easy to discuss. I can answer that real quickly. Under the state law, medical deductibles are no longer.
Larry, just 1 minute till we find out what page it's on, so we can sort of follow
Oh,
along.
you're on
here.
page 16.
16? Okay, great, thanks. All right,
And it's section 4.
Yep.
Section 4, group medical insurance.
okay.
Some of you maybe are familiar that the state of Wisconsin has changed a lot of the laws as it relates to unions and negotiations. And the area that's taken out is pretty substantial, and that's taken out as a result of the state of Wisconsin. They said that there are only certain things you can negotiate in union contracts now, and healthcare deductibles and some of the benefits are no longer negotiable in union contracts. So we took it out because it's no longer anything that we can discuss.
Does that mean that it doesn't apply?
No, everything that was there is still applicable, but it's not something the union has the authority to negotiate on any longer.
All right, so is this language then instead included in the employee handbook?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So the handbook would now reign on these issues.
Okay. Because there is a substantial
Yeah.
amount of information.
Yeah, the agreement got shorter.
And also on the retirement. Explain
Yep.
what section, that would be section 7, page
17.
17.
240,
Pardon?
240 on the electronic.
240 on the electronic version.
In our last contract, our WPPA union phased in or agreed to cover the WRS contributions to their retirement, as it was required of all of the general employees. And our union understood that that was necessary, and that was a point we agreed to in the last contract. In this version, I think you can see that it appears as though A and B are somewhat repetitive. They both say similar, and what has happened is that letter B has become more accurate because the percentages change on an annual basis with WRS based on their formulas. So the 7% is no longer the number, and we're simply
And the employee now pays it all.
they pay all of the employee share. The state of Wisconsin divides up the retirement contributions between employer and employee, and all of the cities with the city of Platteville now pay their employee share.
Okay.
Other questions? Seeing none, then I think this will be on for action next time. All right, Southwestern Wisconsin Regional Planning Grant Contract Infrastructure for expansion of industrial park.
You bet. In 2013, the city of Platteville had purchased land on East Side Road, formerly known as the Rosemeyer property. As a part of this land purchase, we also borrowed about $1 million out of TID District Number 4 to make certain improvements to this property, i.e. stormwater, sanitary sewer, water mains, and perhaps even the extension of Vision Drive. And after speaking with Ed White at Regional Planning Commission, we believe there's an opportunity for the city to get a portion of those funds matched by the Economic Development Administration by applying for an EDA grant. And what I bring before you is a contract to hire Regional Planning Commission to apply for an EDA grant so we can essentially double whatever funds we have to provide infrastructure in that site.
At least that's the hope.
That's the plan, the hope, yep.
If
We don't
we're-
know where we'll end up.
If we were lucky enough to get that, would that other money go back to the TIF then, since we only needed $1 million to do all this instead of $2 million?
Actually, we don't have, we can't get everything done with $1 million. We know that. We think we can get the stormwater, put in the water pipes and the water main, and there may be some breaker run that we can put in for the roads, but we cannot finish Vision Drive under that $1 million estimate. So what we're anticipating is if we are fortunate enough to get funding, we would like to finish Vision Drive and get the concrete curb and gutter and all the street in.
Question there, I know we can't use that money anywhere else, but when we start working or spending money on roads, don't you think we better stick to what we have in the city first before we start putting any more roads out there in the industrial park?
Well, I guess that's up to the city council. It was our planning through the city's comprehensive plan and through our official traffic map that it was our understanding it'd be good for Vision Drive to go through to Phillips. If as a city council you don't believe that's the route we should go, then we need to know that soon.
Good, that's my point.
We can apply for the grant and try to get in all the water and sewer mains.
I think the grant's a great idea.
And if you decide you don't want to put in the road, you can stop that, and we'll eventually we'll have to bid out the contract and everything for the road. At that point, you could refuse to award the bid and stop the road from going in.
Thank you.
Sure.
I will note that our experience with industrial parks has been that the more business-ready, shovel-ready they are, the more attractive they are to developers, because they're usually in a hurry when they get here, and they like to have things available. Okay, that will be on for action next time. Carmen A.J. Binding Trust Endowment Fund Establishment.
Yes. The public and city council may not be aware, but we received funding from a trust, Carmen A. Binding, and they've donated, or Carmen has donated $44,303.33 to the City of Platteville Parks Commission, the Rollo Jameson Museum, Platteville EMS Services, and Roundtree Gallery. And as a city, we are very appreciative of these donations. Now that we have the funding, we have to determine what it is that we intend to do with it. And as city staff, we'd like to come forward and recommend the establishment of trust funds so that these funds can exist on in perpetuity. Included in your packet is a second page, which is an example of what we're doing or hoping to do with the recreation donation. We're trying to establish a challenge grant to the community to match the donation that was created by Bindings, and establish a trust fund to support our recreation activities. And we just want to check in with the city council before we go forward and do this fundraiser to make sure that we're on the same page and that might be something you approve of. As to the other donations, we'd like to consider that as well, perhaps building trust funds in support of the Rollo Jameson, one in support of EMS, and one in support of the fourth entity, the Roundtree Gallery. We believe that letting the heritage live on for an extended periods is worthwhile for the services and for the donors.
Question, Larry, would that, when you talk about establishing those trust funds for utilization of the program, take the recreation program, for example, would it be to improve fields and this sort of thing, not necessarily to buy land to build new parks,
right,
or not to take away the operating budget out of the city budget? That wouldn't change, would it? That wouldn't be part of the money usage?
Right, that's correct. The brochure asks Park Endowment Fund donors to leave a lasting legacy and provide a permanent source of funding to support park improvements, recreation programs, playgrounds, and special events. All donations put into this fund would be matched by the Carmen Binding Trust.
It wouldn't take away the funding for that department then, that the city
Right.
normally funds. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, ultimately, the budget for any department is up to the city council.
I do have a question. I do have to say, I think it would be wise to invest all this money. And that being said, how would the city invest it? Do you go through, another company, a stockbroker? How does that work?
What the city has done in the past is we've used something called the Platteville Community Fund. We did it with the Freudenreich funds. We've done it with the Graham funds. and we establish a fund with specific use for what the fund should be used for, and then someone else, a separate entity, would manage the money on our behalf. The benefit of doing that is the city is restricted by the state of Wisconsin on what we can do with money and what we can invest it in. A good growth mutual fund will get greater returns than, say, investing it in our savings account. And so to benefit the public, we've taken the position that investing it with an entity that can be responsible for the funds provides a greater return.
So the principal would never be spent.
Right. Well, there's a formula, as with all of the trust funds, that they average the income over a 3-year. I'm sorry, maybe Barb could help me a little bit with this. She's a little more familiar with how the formula works.
No, Patrice is right. In an endowment, the funds that are endowed are never spent.
Thank you.
And what is spent is, Luke and I have spoken, so now I'm speaking from my position with the Community Foundation, not as a council member. But over the Community Foundation of Southern Wisconsin would be the holder of the funds, and the return, there are professional investment managers, and then there's a spending policy. They take the average balance of 12 trailing quarters, 12 quarters or 3 years average balance, and then apply the spending percentage. And this year that spending percentage is 4%. So and any extra over 4% earned is actually then turned back into that endowment so that the endowment grows. Because whenever you have an endowment, you want both the endowment to grow and you want to have money to spend. So you actually are trying to answer to two bosses, one that says spend money and one that says don't. And so that's how that would work.
I want to ask Luke if he has anything he'd like to add to this. Luke has really worked hard at trying to help set this up.
Is this just for you? Your proposal here is just for the Park and Rec, right? We haven't gone yet with the other departments.
Other departments might have other recommendations, but
Okay.
This is my recommendation. I'm looking for your opinion on whether that would be an advisable thing to do. So before we proceed with collecting money, that's why we're presenting to you. And really, I don't have much to add other than what's already been presented, unless you have questions.
Well, I have a lot of questions.
Sure.
Okay, I know these folks did. So my first question is, have you relooked at the trust agreements?
We have.
Okay, and?
Mr. Borgen holds the agreements.
Okay.
The Carmen agreement is not as specific as to what the use what the money is for. Originally, Barb and I had a conversation about there being specific needs for those dollars, that they should be spent on specific things. The Carmen donation doesn't, the Carmen Binding Trust does not have those aside from Rollo Jameson Museum or Platteville Parks Commission. But his wife, who is the, I'm sorry, what was her name? Eva Binding is more specific in her will and donation. And we anticipate that at some point we will get a secondary donation from the family under Eva's trust. And her trust is one that is specific as to what the funds should be used for.
Okay. And so we have a proposal from Parks Department.
Yep.
And then the other managers are going to begin to have conversation about their recommendations?
Well, at this point, Luke and I have talked, and what we'd like to do is be able to get this brochure out as soon as we can, and we didn't want to do so without the council's support. Then secondarily, as it relates to the other entities, the other agencies, the other departments, at some point in the future, we would like to follow the same program.
Okay.
But we still have to have conversations with those departments and the advisory committees associated with them. We haven't gone that far as we have with parks.
Okay. And so you need an answer tonight?
Well, it's not up for action,
No,
but
discussion.
But if the city council is willing to do a nonverbal head nod or something to give us, what we would like to do is get this brochure out as soon as we can.
Before the next 2 weeks?
Yes. Hopefully last week.
I
So
have
the
some
the money
comments
would
about
stay,
it. I have some comments about it. I can talk to Luke about it.
Sure. Okay.
now or later?
Later.
So in terms of the actual idea of establish endowment funds, I get, that's really what we will be deciding next time. We'll be talking about, in particular, the parks, but it could be all of them, or it will just be the parks.
I think we need to talk about all of them.
Okay.
Maybe give some committees a direction or what we'd like to see.
Okay.
Without further discussion, I think I'd like to tell the city council our plan is to distribute this brochure. And if you decide that this is the wrong route to go with recreation, we will simply have to refund the money. But we'd like to get this brochure out because it does include all of the sponsorships for our sporting teams.
We're really at crunch on the advertising is the main crunch that we're at. So any money that we were to get for the endowment fund at this point would just have to be held until we got further information.
My only concern would be can you assure me that it's not gonna be used to buy land? Because I know was an attempt to put another park someplace and it went by the wayside. I'd hate to see that money being wasted buying a chunk of land, because we have a lot of parks in this town that could use a lot of good things, like you guys talked about, to maintain them.
At this time, you'll be able to put whatever, we'll be able to restrict the fund if we decide to do so. The land you're referencing, the city already owns,
Okay.
so we would not, of course, be buying land for that.
Okay.
But
I
problem
think
with
that
this.
if you endow $44,000, no matter what it earns, I don't think you would buy very much land with,
not at this
what
point.
would be available. And, you know, I would just caution the council as they think about this, to think about not 5 years and not 10 years, but 100 years, and to say to someone, you shouldn't ever buy land with money that comes out of an endowment 100 years from now.
I
It
agree.
is a
I agree.
little bit, it perhaps could be too restrictive. So I just would really caution the council as it thinks about these things to understand that any restrictions that you may think you want, you need to look at in terms of the long haul.
But they could also be overturned for another council anyway, correct?
In an endowment, that's pretty hard.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
When you establish an endowment and the parameters for an endowment, and then you tell people that this is what you're gonna do with their money, it's pretty hard then, 5 years later, to say, hey, guess what? We decided we're gonna do something else with your money.
Thank you. I
So
didn't know
basically,
that.
you can try to set you could set priorities in the
Set
endowment.
priorities, right.
Maybe not total exclusions, but say, these are the priorities. Yeah, okay.
So with the rec department, the 40, whatever money is donated, the 44,000, we're gonna try to do a matching campaign to try to ask the public to match it and make it 88. So that's our intent.
Well, it
Well, go
sounds
for
to
it.
me like from what I'm gathering from the conversation, it appears that the council is supportive once we, and we'll establish the parameters.
Okay.
When we actually establish the endowment.
Thank you.
Okay, so we need that for action next time.
Yep, and I'll have to get the documents prepared from the community fund as well.
Okay, and I just will add that you said earlier Platteville Community Fund, and actually it will not be the Platteville Community Fund that will be administering this, it will be the Community Foundation of Southern Wisconsin. There is a distinction.
Thank you.
Platteville Community Fund is also under that umbrella, so.
Oh, I have one question, Larry. Do you know, the boards and commissions that received this money, has it gone on to their agendas? Do you have an idea?
I do not know at this time. I do know that the library, the library foundation did receive their funds.
But we don't,
And you can confirm that, right?
yeah,
Well,
But
the
that will
museum
be
board
the-
will be meeting, what, I think next Wednesday.
the
the
Jameson is in.
Yeah.
Well, that money that went to the library was specifically designated for the foundation.
Yeah, we don't have a say in that as a city. It went to the foundation. The other entities, I quite frankly want to take my time with and make sure that we have a format to follow, and I can meet with them one-on-one when they're ready.
Well, they should know that the city received the money then.
Okay, the last item is the last item in information and discussion at least is proposal to add the RLO, limited occupancy residential overlay district, as an overlay option on residential historic districts. And this is something that Councilor Killian has brought forward and has asked that the council look at this information. Again, I'm going to recommend that this one go on information and discussion again next time. But if anybody has anything that they would like to ask now, certainly feel free to do that.
So Ken, my understanding of this is you're just asking for a change in wording in the ordinances. You're not you're not proposing a residential overlay district in any historic district.
No, I'm just proposing that they have the option to develop one.
That if they wanted to, but
they
then
wanted
they would
to.
have to follow the same rules, 75% and
They'd have
of the
to
people and.
make a petition and bring it to the council.
And actually, what the whole residential overlay district was probably not a part of what we had ever talked about when this ordinance or this, whatever it is it an ordinance? This
The overlay
chapter
district?
22 or whatever it is you want amended.
We-
That probably, I mean, we probably added this since that was discussed. Is that correct?
We set it up for R1 and R2, and there are 2 historic districts that are in R3.
Okay, so this would add R3 historic.
It would add the 2 historic districts, which would be Division Street and the West Main historic districts.
Okay.
And there's a map in the packet that shows those locations.
Okay.
All right, so again, let's hold that one for information and discussion again next time so that people have a chance to study it a little more and ask any questions. So next is to go into closed session. So if someone would please make that motion by reading the information in your packet, I'd appreciate it.
I move we go into closed session per Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. Tonight we'll be discussing city manager employment contract.
Return to open session for
Return to
adjournment.
open session for adjournment.
Second,
We have a motion and a second, and we'll vote.
Doss,
yes?
Stockhausen,
Yes?
Bonin,
Yeah.
Killian,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes,
Steiner,
Yes.
Den,
Yes.
motion carries.
thank you. We'll take about a 5-minute recess here, folks.
Fancy pen.
I live in
I just printed out so I can.